Well, joining me right now to discuss this is Sir Iain Duncan Smith. He's a Tory MP, of course, former leader of the Conservative Party. Good morning to you, Sir Iain, and a very happy new year to you.
Good morning. Happy New Year to you, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. I think we were all waiting with bated breath what the Prime Minister was going to say. Yes, there was no doubt at all he wasn't going to get through his first PMQs of the new year without making an announcement on this. Such was the public outcry over this scandal when people got to know about it. You, I know, will have been one of the many MPs, trying to actually flag this up and keeping this in the news and trying to get government to act over the years. But do you think what the Prime Minister announced in terms of the sort of £600,000 sort of starter compensation for those who were actually wrongly convicted, £75,000 for those who had to pay money back and accused of wrongdoing but weren't actually taken to court and convicted, and a possibility of an awful lot more for those involved in the court case that we saw in the final episode of that ITV drama, and the fact that we're looking at the whole thing taking, well, probably a year. Is that good enough? Is it enough? And is it soon enough?
Well, if you put this into context, of course, it was key MPs. In fact, the minister in charge at the moment, who's made the announcements and made the statements in Parliament, he was one of those who was raising this issue as a backbench MP. So he has been on this for as long as anybody else has been. James Arbuthnot, of course, were featured, I think, in the programme as well, but he was very much on it. I remember talking to him about it. Not every constituency had cases like this. I think it was hugely rural constituencies and rural postmasters got caught in this terrible mess of the post offices. There were others in urban environments, but not, I don't think, as many as far as I can make out. So it was just a massive injustice. It was growing all the time. Nobody really knew how many were involved in all of this because the numbers were never officially published. So you weren't certain whether this was 20, 30, 40, or as it's turned out to be, just under 1,000 and maybe more, because so much was hidden from those who inquired. Is the settlement announced yesterday enough? I think what we should see it as is a starting point, because two things happened yesterday, not just the money. This lingering problem of how do you deal with all those who wrongly got persecuted by the post office and eventually got criminal records, either went to prison, as some did, or got criminal records but didn't go to prison. And the key thing is there are so many of them. If we plod through this through the courts, the problem is this could take forever. And if you're waiting for the end result of that, then you may have a significant delay. So I think the government has been desperately trying to find a way through that doesn't usurp the rights of the courts, which is, of course, important. Yeah. We shouldn't be curtailing legal processes. But what they have agreed now is that they will clean the slate, not pardon, exonerate, which was the critical debate yesterday. They will be exonerated. And the point he made is there may be one or two people in there who were guilty of some charges, we don't know, but they will, with the rest, be exonerated. Of course,
there's been quite an obsession about this, hasn't there? I couldn't care less. For start, those people have had that criminal conviction all this time anyway. They've been punished enough, one could say. But also, I mean, we have this as a principle in law in this country. Better that 10 guilty men go free than one guilty man is falsely convicted.
I agree, but to be fair to him, that's exactly what he said yesterday, because we wanted to ask him about what happened, and he said so. This will now be clear. The two things, the differences about the money is that those who had criminal convictions, of course, also faced enormous costs at the same time. So these are immediate and will be immediate payments. And for those who weren't, there's an immediate payment of 70. But as I understood it from yesterday, he said, though, there will be further availability when people are able, under the cover of that money, to make further representations about their losses that they've suffered as well, because they may not be blanket amounts of money. So some people may need a lot more, some people may not. And so that's the process. The government's trying to find a way to get this done quickly, whilst at the same time continuing to understand exactly what went wrong.
Yeah, and we're still doing that through the inquiry as well, and there are hearings today on that. And again, one of the things that's emerged today that already come out in the inquiry is that the fraud investigators, as we saw in the ITV drama, the men in black cars arriving at the village post office and closing them down and making these accusations, they were basically given bonuses. Everyone you can get convicted, everyone you take to court, you get a bonus for that. I mean, these are completely the wrong incentives, aren't they?
Well, they were completely wrong, full stop, because, of course, they assumed guilt. Now, if you charge somebody, they normally have a proper right to discover what your evidence is on this. And of course, none of that was released. So the courts never got to see exactly how these figures were worked out and where they came from.
Part
That's
of
the most
the
important
problem
bit.
that actually that this, and again, I think most of us were stunned to discover this, that the Post Office, along with many other organisations, not just public organisations, has the right to bring these private prosecutions and have been doing so for, since before the creation of the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service.
Yeah, no, I'm in favour of withdrawing all of that now. I have been for some time. The RSPCA is another body that does this endlessly and often does vexatious prosecutions to get publicity. I think there have been cases that I've known of. So I think if you have a Crown Prosecution Service, prosecutions for anybody, even an arm's length body to do with government, should be done through that Crown Prosecution Service, whose job then is to interrogate the evidence that is presented to them and only go ahead if they think that there is reason to believe that the individual themselves was fraudulently committing a crime. And I think the main point about all of this is, and I come back to this, when we set up Universal Credit, we had to have a huge work on checking that the process worked, that the IT system worked. We had 100 digital engineers sitting next to the staff. We tested it constantly. We were accused of being slow and everything else because we were worried that things that we might have come into contact didn't work like they did in theory. And so that was the process you do till eventually you're certain that what happens pretty much beyond any doubt is that this will reflect the nature of what you're trying to resolve.
I mean, and no computer system is perfect, but this scale of problem was huge, and the impact on people. Can I ask you though more about sort of the whole system? I think one of the reasons why people are so angry, and I think the desperation of a lot of the people who were afflicted by this horrific wrongdoing to them, is that the idea that sort of the little person can't really make change. They can't get their voice heard. If these cases, the case that they brought, largely cases are won in the courts by the person who's got the most money. That the system doesn't listen. When people wrote to the Post Office minister at the time, Sir Ed Davey, his reply was, "Well, I've spoken to civil servants, and the civil servants spoken to the Post Office, and they say everything's fine." And so it's all but that's what's happened with all of the big scandals. I keep going on about the contaminated blood scandal, these NHS trusts, all these other problems that we've had over the years, all the scandals where there's been horrible wrongdoing and horrible cover-up and a concern about people keeping their jobs, keeping their bonuses, keeping their pensions, about protecting the reputation of an organisation. It's happened in the police force. Well, yeah, we know we've got a load of police officers. One's called the rapist, but let's not flag it up because it'll be bad for the police force's reputation. There is a real concern now that, not only in this country does nothing work properly, but also that there is like a sort of an establishment conspiracy by big corporations, by big government, by all the bodies, all the public services, to trample on individuals when they are speaking up and saying something's gone wrong here. Is that right, though? Is that what's happening?
Well, that's been happening since time immemorial. Big bodies, public bodies, even private companies, corporations. What they do is they lose touch with the idea that each case is about an individual and about a human being. I will say one thing about this. If you look at people like James Arbuthnot and the others on both sides of the House, backbench MPs responsible for their constituencies really were the ones chasing and trying to help. Now, that in some way does tell you that the system of having constituency MPs is really all about that your constituents come to you with an issue and you try and take it up. And then you start hounding the government and doesn't matter what colour the government is, you have an opportunity to raise these in debates, etc. And it was that process that really began to get under the skin, I think, of the government. With all the hard work that was put together by those postmasters, their MPs were able to bring it forward. That bit does, I think, work in that sense because they then represent those people, as you said earlier on, ordinary people who don't have the power and capacity to hold those ministries to account. So, number one, that's the one bit of this that did work, which is people like James Arbuthnot were championing this issue against and at the government at the time and at the ministers as well. Even though it's taken a while, they were there trying to represent their constituents and trying to get their cases brought forward. But you're quite right The problem is always that when you end up in a big corporation or a big business or a big government department and I hate the arm's length departments. I can't understand how we end up with this ridiculous process of government departments or government sections that somehow can't be dealt with directly by ministers, yet they're not actually private sector companies at all. All of that stuff needs to be really seriously looked at and rectified. But the main bit is people who work in them then start to imbibe this culture of, we're going to protect our people, we're going to protect what's going on here, and therefore we must constantly defy and deny that there can be anything wrong with what we're doing. That's where the problem starts to exist, and then it just spreads all the way through. So everybody then says, well, we're not wrong about this, and we're going to carry on. And it's important, therefore, to say, well, wait a minute, no, this thing was going wrong. Let's have a very good look at it, and let's be honest about it.
We
And the trouble
absolutely
is,
need
when
a
you are
massive
honest
cultural
about it,
change.
you get
We do.
attacked for it.
Ian, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining Sir Iain Duncan Smith, Tory MP, of course, former leader of the Conservative Party. Thank you for that. Still with me is Claire Pissell. She's former Home Office Special Advisor. So you've been behind the scenes in government. We were talking about this a bit earlier. I mean, the big question is whether people feel, whether those who've been wronged in the Post Office scandal or people who've been angered by this revelations that came out in the ITV drama, has the government done enough, and are they acting quickly enough?
I think they're acting very quickly now. I don't think it will ever be enough to right the wrongs that have happened to people. And there are some people, sadly, who aren't here to see the end of this process. But until the inquiry starts properly and we get to see more people giving evidence, we need to understand the culpability of Fujitsu, but also Post Office executives before you start looking at who knew what and when. I mean, we need to know what those people are going to be held accountable for. Now, bearing in mind, the Post Office, all of those pensions are backed by the taxpayer.
Yes.